this multidisciplinary approach video, we shall be discussing a very important topic. All the subject experts will be sharing important points, sharing their wisdom regarding this topic. But at the onset, I'm not talking about what exactly the topic is. I have only mentioned the presentation which the child presented. It was a child with unilateral abdominal mass. Just like Sherlock Holmes, we shall be moving from the initial presentation, adding all evidence one by one. Then we'll reach the diagnosis. It will not only clear your concepts, but also tell you how to approach such questions when you attend your clinics. And then we'll be compiling one liners, Nelson based points, and the other faculty members will be sharing their wisdom. So it will be a complete package for you, whether you are a MBBS resident, you are preparing for entrance exams, or you are a postgraduate. So let us begin the fun. First of all, the case. This was a patient A, we won't take the name, 3-year-old child who was a male child and a resident of Kapurthala, Punjab. The child presented with chief complaints of mass present on the left side of abdomen since 3 weeks. There was a progressively enlarging mass which was noticed by the mother 3 weeks back. On history of present illness, it was found that till 3 weeks back, the child was absolutely fine when the mother noticed that there is a progressively enlarging abdominal mass present on the lower left side of the abdomen. So it was progressively increasing in size. On further asking, it was found that there was one history of one episode of passing pink red urine by the child, which according to mother cleared up in 1 or 2 days. So probably we are thinking of hematuria here, right? Then the child also had history of crying on micturition since past 1 week. You know that crying on micturition in young children is a sign of dysuria, and so there may be UTI also associated in this condition. So probably the mass we are looking at has something to do with the kidneys and the urogenital system. So these are the clues we are accumulating on this side. There was no edema, no altered sensorium, and no oligouria. The child had no significant weight loss or loss of appetite. There were no other systemic symptoms. Development history was normal. The family history was also normal, and the elder sibling aged 9 years was absolutely fine. This child itself also had no history of any hospitalization. On general physical examination, I found that the vitals were stable. The child did not have any evidence of malnutrition. The weight for age was within 80% of expected and height for age was within 90% of expected. Children with acute and subacute presentation often are found to have relatively preserved nutritional status, although it can go either ways. The child had pallor, so there was anemia present in the child. There was no icterus, no cyanosis or clubbing, no lymphadenopathy, and no pedal edema. So the only positive finding here was pallor in the child. On systemic examination, when we examined, the child had fullness of the abdomen, as you can see on per abdomen examination. So inspection revealed that the child has fullness involving the left lower side and few dilated veins were present. On palpation, a large 7 centimeter by 5 centimeter mass was felt on the left side. It was having smooth margins, was firm in consistency, was non-tender, not crossing the midline, and was bimanually ballotable. This is a very useful clue. Point to remember, bimanually ballotable mass. Think of renal masses, right? So bimanually ballotable mass was present, large mass was present, which was touching, almost reaching the midline, but was not crossing the midline. On percussion, there was no free fluid which was present. Auscultation revealed normal bowel sounds and no bruise were seen. Further, although it is not mentioned, but no other positive findings like hepatomegaly or any specific splenomegaly was present in the child. The remaining systemic examination was found to be normal. So what are the differential diagnoses of abdominal masses? Here the mass is accompanied with urinary symptoms and it is a ballotable mass. So it is always better to divide, to talk about the causes, the differential diagnosis according to the case we have. So differential diagnosis, one way is you can divide the DD into two parts. Either it can be a renal mass, which is more likely, or it can be a non-renal mass, which is less likely. But for the purpose of DD, we will write all of them, the important ones. So renal masses, In this age, 2 to 5 years, what all you can think of, which can be the possibilities? First is Wilms tumor. Second possibility, there can be multicystic dysplastic kidney. Thirdly, there can be hydronephrosis in the child. And fourth possibility is other polycystic kidney diseases. Non-renal masses may include simply splenomegaly. In case of splenomegaly, the upper edge cannot be felt and it will not be bimanually palpable. Secondly, it can be an adrenal mass. Which adrenal mass you can think of? Yes, you are right. You will think of neuroblastoma. Then it can be enteric cysts. And had it been on the right side, we could have thought of hepatic mass like hepatoblastoma or choledochal cyst as well. Since it is a left-sided mass, so we'll not include those in the list here. And then there can be a possibility of rhabdomyosarcoma. So these are the common masses from likelihood that you will think of and you would consider here. So what was the provisional diagnosis in our patient based upon history and examination? It was a unilateral renal mass with possibly UTI and hematuria. Clinical possibilities, one strong possibility was Wilms tumor. Another slightly less possibility was multicystic dysplastic kidney, because that can have abdominal mass, although it occurs in a younger child, but unilateral multicystic dysplastic kidney can also be associated with hematuria and UTI due to vesicoureteric reflux. So these were the provisional diagnoses. So investigations were performed. On investigation, these were the results which came to us. Overall, RFTs, LFTs were normal. Platelet count was normal. As we were suspecting, pallor was present and hemoglobin was found to be 8.9 grams per deciliter and 80% neutrophils were seen, although the TLC was relatively preserved. So there was evidence of some infection in the child with HB, and although it is not mentioned here, but the CRP in the child was found to be positive. Quantitative CRP could not be performed, but qualitative CRP was found to be positive in this child. When urine analysis was performed, we found that the pH was acidic. RBCs were 20 to 25 per high power field. So significant hematuria was present. Pus cells were 6 to 8 per high power field. No cast, no bacteria and rare epithelial cells were present. And urine culture was positive for Escherichia coli at 48 hours, which was sensitive to multiple antibiotics, including third generation cephalosporins, but was resistant to trimethoprim. Further, we performed imaging or radiological investigations. Chest X-ray was found to be normal. Whenever you are suspecting Wilms tumor, you should always get a chest X-ray done, because lung metastasis is very common, and Nelson says almost half of the children, if they present a bit late, can have pulmonary metastasis at the time of presentation. Ultrasound was very valuable here. I'll talk about why it was. First, you'll see. It was 7 to 5 centimeter well-defined solid mass with heterogeneous echogenicity in the left kidney. There were no bladder stones, no ureter abnormalities, and right kidney was unremarkable. Heterogeneous echogenicity shows that probably there were areas of necrosis and hemorrhage present in that kidney. An ultrasound can easily differentiate Wilms tumor from multicystic dysplastic kidney. In multicystic dysplastic kidney, there will be non-functioning cysts with very little renal parenchyma present on the affected side. Here, there was a solid mass with heterogeneous echogenicity and no multiple cystic masses were present, so multicystic dysplastic kidney could easily be ruled out. So ultrasound is useful when you need to distinguish Wilms tumor from MCDK. And CT scan showed a large left-sided mass with multiple low-density areas. There was no evidence of any nodal or hepatic metastasis. The diagnosis made was Wilms tumor with underlying urinary tract infection. So what was the course we took? Pediatric surgery and oncology consultation was taken. There was UTI that needed to be treated. So we started the patient on IV ceftriaxone, 50 mg per kg per day. BD, that is 100 mg per kg per day in 2 divided doses, were given for 7 days, with shifting to cefixime being done once the child was afebrile. With the provisional diagnosis of Wilms tumor, a left-sided radical nephrourectomy was performed subsequently. Remember, we don't do biopsy directly in Wilms tumor. It is always a surgical staging which is performed, and no intra and post-operative complications were seen in the patient.
I'm happy to be a part of this integrated video, Wilms tumor. I'm going to cover the management part of Wilms tumor now. We have a picture showing you a CT scan showing you a right side Wilms tumor. So, with regarding to Wilms tumor, you should know there are two types of staging. One is National Wilms Tumor Study Group staging. National Wilms Tumor Study Group staging, and another is SIOP staging. Society of International Oncopediatricians. This is known as Society of International Oncopediatricians. And another staging is National Wilms Tumor Study Group, which is also known as Children Oncosurgery Group. So there are only small difference in these two groups. We manage the tumors either by direct surgery or with a neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by surgery. In these two studies, in National Wilms Tumor Study Group, here we first do surgery. Upfront nephrectomy is done. First do surgery and staging is done based on the specimen. Based on the specimen, we take it out. No? From that, we do the staging. That is known as National Wilms Tumor Study Group or Children Oncosurgery Group, also known as COG group. So please remember COG or National Wilms Tumor Study Group. And the other one is SIOP group. In this group, we don't do surgery first. We first give pre-op chemotherapy and then we go for nephrectomy, and staging here is based on pre-op chemotherapy imaging. So here staging in the SIOP is based on CT scan. Based on CT scan. In National Wilms Tumor Group, the staging is based on specimen. That's the main difference, and this is the only question asked from a National Wilms Tumor Study Group and SIOP in AIIMS exam. The only question asked from differences between the two types of staging is staging in National Wilms Tumor Study Group is based on the specimen. SIOP group is based on the CT scan. Okay, so now we'll see what are the things in this. So stage 1 in National Wilms Tumor Study Group, from the specimen, the staging is tumor is confined to the kidney and we have completely excised with the intact capsule. We have completely excised the kidney with the intact capsule in specimen. This is the finding in specimen. So tumor confined, the CT scan, this is a SIOP, which is a CT scan staging. CT scan shows tumor is confined to the kidney, completely excised, and the capsule is intact. The capsule is intact. Okay. And stage 2, National Wilms Tumor Study Group on imaging on surgery time showing it is extending beyond the renal capsule. No invasion of adjacent viscera are met. Only microscopic residual tumor are present, and renal vessels, tumor in renal vessels are seen, but not beyond the renal sinus. Here you see the tumor has invaded into the renal vessels, but not beyond the sinus. So biopsy is done before resection. So there has been a biopsy done before resection. That is said to be stage 2 and completely resected. This tumor is completely resected. This is specimen based report. So SIOP system, it is a CT scan based staging. Tumor has already extended beyond the kidney in the CT. Extrarenal invasion is seen. Adjacent organ or visceral invasion seen. Regional nodes are involved. Regional nodes are involved in this staging and resected completely. After the CT scan staging, we have completely removed it. It is known as SIOP system stage 2. Stage 3, very important stage 3, it's already a diffuse spillage seen. It is ruptured. Peritoneal implants are seen. When I am opening, it is already ruptured. It is spread everywhere in the abdominal cavity. There is macroscopic residual disease. After surgery, I am grossly leaving the nodes and tumor there itself. SIOP, the tumor is invaded beyond the capsule with incomplete excision. Pre-op or peri-op biopsy done, peritoneal mets are seen, pre-op or per-op picture, all those things. So para-aortic nodes are seen below the renal artery origin, will come under SIOP. So his para-aortic nodes are here. Here only regional nodes are here. In SIOP 2, it is regional nodes. In 3, it is para-aortic nodes. So 4 is a condition in which, please remember, 4 is a condition in which there is a hematogenous mets. So locally advanced beyond the abdomen and pelvis. It has locally advanced beyond the abdomen and pelvis is NWTS, and SIOP also same hematogenous mets, and is extended beyond to the lung and liver, everything. Okay, it has extended to the lung and liver. Stage 5 is the only MCQ. If at all they are interested in asking some MCQ from the staging, usually they won't ask for NEET PG, but if you're interested in asking, there are stage 5. Stage 5 is nothing but bilateral Wilms tumor. Bilateral Wilms tumor is stage 5. So please remember this basic staging. And there is one more classification of Wilms tumor known as histological classification. Histological classification is defined by NWTSG, and the SIOP studies differs because SIOP protocols uses pre-op chemotherapy. In SIOP, we are using pre-op chemotherapy. So therefore, what happens if I give pre-op chemotherapy, the tumor may shrink and the quality of the tumor may decrease. So, but anyhow, the anaplasia will not change. Anaplasia is the basis of histological classification. So in NWTS, whereas SIOP, the histological classification is based on cell differentiation, including chemotherapy-induced regressive changes. However, it has been proved that anaplastic features are not altered even after chemotherapy. The anaplastic features are not altered even after chemotherapy. Therefore, we can do histological classification of SIOP. So SIOP has a histological classification known as low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk. High risk type is blastemal and diffuse anaplastic type are high risk type. So diffuse anaplastic is high risk, focal anaplastic is intermediate, diffuse anaplastic is high risk. So low risk is completely necrotic nephroblastoma or cystic partially differentiated nephroblastoma. So no need to remember all these things, just remember low risk, intermediate risk, high risk are the three types of SIOP histological classification. So now let me tell you what are we going to do according to NWTSG, National Wilms Tumor Study Group Protocol. What I am going to do? I am going to do now, I have to case diagnostic case, whatever it may be the stage, and I don't know the stage now, I will open and remove the specimen and then I will know the stage. Now what I am going to do? I am opening the abdomen by a midline laparotomy or a transverse incision. We will open the abdomen. We will always do unilateral radical ureteronephrectomy. So we have to completely remove the kidney, ureter, completely up to the bladder cuff. Imaging studies are showing opposite kidneys involved. Explore that kidney also and see what is needed there. Any pre-op biopsy or intraoperative spill is considered as stage 3. If somebody already has done a biopsy and they have spilled the tumor, it is known as stage 3. Adrenal gland, will I remove always? No. If tumor is abutting that, we have to remove the adrenal gland. Otherwise, no need to remove the adrenal gland. If the tumor is infiltrating or abutting the adrenal, you remove. Ureter dissected as low as possible. This is the procedure we do in these cases. Okay, we do in these cases surgery. So now what will you do if the contiguous organs are involved? So contiguous organs are only mildly adherent, usually can be dissected out easily. If frank invasion is seen, we have to remove small part of diaphragm or psoas or even tip of pancreas. Diaphragm, psoas, tip of pancreas, everything should be removed. Partial hepatectomy or colectomy is not recommended. You should not do partial hepatectomy or colectomy for the patients who are infiltrating. Primary resection of liver mets is also not recommended prior to adjuvant therapy. So if there is a liver mets, we will first directly go for SIOP protocol of giving preoperative chemotherapy. So if there is a liver mets, we don't remove the liver mets. We don't remove the colon also. So we can remove diaphragm, psoas or pancreatic tip if there is small infiltration. So in case of frank invasion. So what about the intraoperative spillage? So this intraoperative spillage is a major issue of this NWTSG group. You can see once there is a spillage, it goes as stage 3. I hope you know it as going for stage 3. You are unwantedly spreading the tumor, it is becoming stage 3. We cannot remove the tumor, everything. There will be a macroscopic residual tumor left. So this is a problem with the NWTSG group. So operative steps during operative time, any suspicious area biopsied. There is 6-fold increase in local recurrence is seen because of the spillage. And if any lymph nodes are seen, we have to take sampling nodes from the renal hilum, pre-caval, para-aortic nodes. All these nodes we have to take sampling for staging. And operative steps, 4 to 11% of the patients will have renal vein IVC right atrium involvement. Extension into the renal vein or IVC must be removed en bloc. Please remember, if there is a renal vein or IVC invasion, you can remove it en bloc as you do in renal cell cancer. If invasion is present, primary resection of IVC above the hepatic not recommended. So no need of IVC resection. In such cases, we go for preoperative chemotherapy of SIOP. If still present above hepatic veins after pre-op chemo, then we have to remove the thrombus. So if the thrombus has gone above the hepatic vein, then only we go for bypass. It's done only after preoperative chemotherapy. Okay, this is about the tumor thrombus. So please remember, if there is a tumor thrombus in renal vein or IVC, we can remove it. En bloc. If the invasion is present, the infiltration of the IVC above the hepatic, we don't recommend it. We only do biopsy and we give a pre-op chemotherapy for those cases. Okay. So this is a tumor thrombus. You can see a tumor thrombus being removed from the atrium. You can see there is a tumor thrombus extending from IVC to atrium. It is completely removed in this picture. So lung mets is not a contraindication for resection of abdominal tumor, but liver mets we don't do resection. So liver mets we should give pre-op chemotherapy before resection. So in lung mets is not a contraindication. Post-op chemotherapy and radiotherapy is recommended. If it persists, we have to go for surgical excision again. Lung mets is not a contraindication. We may not stop the surgery. We can go for surgery and we can give chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and after the tumor shrinks, we can go for surgical excision. So bilateral Wilms tumor is seen in 4 to 13% cases. They are known as synchronous or metachronous tumors. There is increased risk of renal failure if you go for operation. Initial biopsy is not recommended by COG. 6 weeks of pre-op chemotherapy is given. If not responsive, then only open biopsies to define the histology. So please remember, initially, if you see a tumor, bilateral Wilms tumor, there is no other tumor which comes bilateral in children. So therefore, you can directly go for pre-op chemotherapy. And if 6 weeks of pre-op chemotherapy, there is no response, then only we go for biopsy to define the histology of the tumor. Okay. So nephron sparing surgery not done in extensive tumor thrombus, positive margins and anaplastic histology. We should not do a partial nephrectomy. So partial nephrectomy is a procedure in which only we remove the tumor with a margin. If positive margin is present or anaplastic histology is present or extensive tumor thrombus present, we should not do nephron sparing surgery. So I have completed the surgery by National Wilms Tumor Study Protocol. Now I am going to do chemotherapy. So this is too much for a NEET PG level, but please remember that chemotherapy drugs used are dactinomycin, vincristine are the two commonly used drugs for stage 1 and stage 2. So this is stage 1 and stage 2. We use only dactinomycin and vincristine. Please remember this. And it is given for 18 weeks. Just remember this. And 24 weeks for stage 3 and stage 4. So FH means favorable histology. UH means unfavorable histology. So this is not for your level, but just remember we give dactinomycin, vincristine and are the two drugs used for stage 2. Doxorubicin is added for stage 3. Okay, that's the point. For stage 3 and stage 4, we give radiotherapy also. So stage 1 and stage 2 only chemotherapy. Stage 3 and stage 4 chemotherapy plus radiotherapy is given. This is enough for PG level. Okay. So now coming on to the SIOP protocol in which chemotherapy is followed by surgery. Chemotherapy followed by surgery. I am going to start chemotherapy immediately. So treated with the pre-op chemotherapy for 4 weeks. How long will you give pre-op chemotherapy? 4 weeks. 6 weeks for metastatic disease followed by surgical resection. Post-operative chemotherapy that is based upon the staging and histology assessment performed after initial chemotherapy. Okay, post-operative chemotherapy is also given. So SIOP protocol does not stop with pre-op chemotherapy. We do pre-op chemotherapy 4 weeks, remove the tumor, then you give post-op chemotherapy also based on the staging and histology. So you can see the patient. The patient who is followed on an SIOP protocol, you can see on a pre-op chemotherapy the tumor has shrunk very small. It has come very small down. That is a major advantage. Marked reduction in the size of tumor is seen with SIOP protocol. So SIOP protocol for non-metastatic cases, pre-op chemotherapy consists of vincristine and dactinomycin for 4 weeks. Vincristine and dactinomycin for 4 weeks. Metastatic cases, we give vincristine, dactinomycin, doxorubicin for 6 weeks. So metastatic cases, 6 weeks of pre-op. Non-metastatic, 4 weeks of pre-op. Okay. So this is a post-operative regimen. Now, after giving this therapy, I have done a nephroureterectomy as usual. Nephroureterectomy is done. Now I should give a post-op regimen. Post-op regimen is based on the grade of tumor. It is based on the grade of tumor. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 1 and stage 2, you can see the same drugs. Dactinomycin and vincristine are given for around 18 weeks. Advanced stages, we go for 28 weeks. High-grade dysplasias, we go for 34 weeks. So only the duration changes, and for the advanced cases, we give ifosfamide, epirubicin are all added for high-grade tumors. So no need to remember all these things. Just remember 18 weeks to 34 weeks we give for post-operative chemotherapy. So what are the pros and cons of these two protocols? So disadvantage of SIOP protocol is administration of chemotherapy to a patient with a benign disease. Sometimes because we're not going to take biopsy always. Sometimes we may give a chemotherapy unwantedly for a benign disease. Pre-op chemotherapy confirmation of diagnosis. For pre-op chemotherapy, confirmation of diagnosis is not mandatory, and many times we will treat the case by chemotherapy unwantedly. Administration of chemotherapy to a patient with a different histological type of malignant tumor. So dactinomycin, so you know very well, dactinomycin and vincristine are very useful only for Wilms tumor. Sometimes what happens, because of the, without knowing the histology, we are going to give the chemotherapy, we may go for some other drug we may give. So modification of the tumor histology because of the therapy, the tumor histology can change and loss of staging information can happen in SIOP protocol. Okay, in SIOP protocol, that's the major issue. And when you come to SIOP advantage, the major advantage is the tumor size decreases considerably, thereby making the surgery easy and remove the tumor without rupture. Possible role of renal sparing surgery is also possible. We can also do nephron sparing procedure, and also we can reduce the size of tumor considerably. The risk of rupture is very, very less. So National Wilms Tumor Study Group, this is a disadvantage. Tumor spillage is seen intraoperatively, which increases the risk of local recurrence. And failure to sample lymph nodes leads to downstaging and under-treatment of the patient. So in case of National Wilms Tumor Study Group, while we are doing nephrectomy, we should take nodal sampling. That is a must. If we miss to take nodal sampling, there may be an under-treatment which will happen. So this is about the SIOP protocol and National Wilms Tumor Study Protocol.
On pathological analysis, when the histopathological sample was celled, it was found that grossly it was a large, solitary, rounded, lobulated, tan-colored mass. The key words I have highlighted here, with surrounding pseudocapsule present, and as ultrasound was suggesting, there were areas of hemorrhage and necrosis being present. So areas of hemorrhage and necrosis in a large solid cystic mass were present on pathology, on gross microscopy. And when microscopic examination was performed, we found that a triphasic pattern was seen. What is a triphasic pattern? All the three elements were present. There were blastemal elements of small round blue cells, there were stromal elements, and there were epithelial cell derivatives in the form of abortive tubules. Immunohistochemistry for tumor markers could not be performed due to financial constraints with the parents. So very similar picture was seen. As you can see in this picture, this is the classic triphasic histology. There is presence of stroma, which is shown by S. There is multiple small round blue cells, which are the blastemal elements, and you have tubules getting formed, which are the epithelial cell derivatives being present in this patient. So triphasic histology is seen in patients with Wilms tumor. So let us discuss some key things about Wilms tumor now. The first thing is, Wilms tumor is the most common primary renal tumor in case of children. Second thing, it is the second most common intra-abdominal malignancy in children. What is the most common intra-abdominal malignancy in children? It is neuroblastoma. Wilms tumor occurs in the peak age group of 2 to 5 years. So whenever you have a mass in a child with 2 to 5 year age group, Wilms tumor should always come to your mind. So peak age is 2 to 5 years. Wilms tumor is found to be unilateral in more than 90% cases. Bilateral Wilms tumor is seen in only about 5 to 10% cases. Some books give a value of around 7%. So these are some of the one-liners that you need to remember regarding Wilms tumor. Now, talking about the clinical presentation. Wilms tumor, the most common clinical presentation is in the form of an asymptomatic, progressively enlarging abdominal mass. This abdominal mass usual word is being used because there are always exceptions in medicine and pediatrics, usually does not cross the midline. If it crosses, that does not mean the diagnosis is ruled out, but usually it does not cross the midline. It is a distinguishing point mentioned in text from neuroblastoma. Other presentations include 25% cases are found to have hypertension, which occurs due to increased renin secretion. Other common presentations include urinary tract infection, low to moderate grade fever, gross hematuria, and constitutional symptoms, which may include fever, night sweats, irritability, etc. And rarely, patients may present with features like rheumatological abnormalities like anemia and von Willebrand disease like illness. The sites of metastasis, most commonly it goes to lungs, which is present in many patients at the time of presentation, followed by lymph nodes, followed by brain. Bony metastases are very rare, except a specific variety known as clear cell sarcoma variety. So on histology, only the clear cell sarcoma variant shows bony metastasis. Otherwise, normal Wilms tumor does not go to bones, and any bony metastasis, bony pain, raccoon eyes, all those features will be in favor of neuroblastoma rather than Wilms tumor. So this is the most common presentation. The child, in our case, the index kid, had enlarging abdominal mass, the child did not have hypertension, the vitals were stable, but the child had UTI and there was also gross hematuria in the patient. Now, what are the syndromes associated with Wilms tumor? If tomorrow I have a NEET PG or INI-CET exam and I am supposed to remember only the sure important things, I'll revise the syndromes associated with Wilms tumor. Very high likelihood of being asked in the paper. The three common syndromes associated with Wilms tumor, the first common one is Weger syndrome. Weger syndrome carries approximately 33% risk of developing Wilms tumor. Weger stands for Wilms tumor, aniridia, that is bilateral absence of iris, genitourinary malformations or genitourinary abnormalities, and R stands for retardation of brain, that is mental retardation. The second feature, the second syndrome associated with Wilms tumor is Dennis-Drash syndrome. Dennis-Drash syndrome has a very high risk, close to 90% risk of Wilms tumors. If question asks you which has a highest risk among all these syndromes, Dennis-Drash syndrome has highest risk. This is associated with Wilms tumor. There is early onset renal failure due to mesangial sclerosis. The genetic aspects I'm not writing because our pathology faculty will be touching upon the genes involved in these. There is also male pseudohermaphroditism which is seen in these patients. The term pseudohermaphrodite is no longer used, but the description has stuck around. Pseudohermaphroditism word has been now replaced by ambiguous genitalia. So male having a female-like genitalia is male pseudohermaphroditism, and they will have increased risk of gonadoblastoma. This point is not mentioned in many books. So there is increased risk of gonadoblastoma along with Wilms tumor in Dennis-Drash syndrome. And third one is the Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome. Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome is a very dramatic syndrome. It carries between 30 to 75% risk depending upon the variant. Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome itself has many variants which will make it too complicated. So Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, all we need to know is the features. Along with Wilms tumor, they will have hemihypertrophy. So one half of the body is enlarged. They will have macroglossia, large tongue which will be protruding out from the body, from the mouth. They will have anterior abdominal wall defects, particularly omphalocele. They will have internal organs being enlarged in size, so organomegaly. One important thing which is not mentioned in many books, But case series have shown a strong association in Southeast Asian children with Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome is earlobe abnormalities. There are creases, pits, or furrows present in the earlobe. So they are very common. Alone, if you are having, you may be having, I have a small earlobe furrow, but that does not mean I have a Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome. It is this spectrum of abnormality which tells you that yes, if the child is having hemihypertrophy or omphalocele and there is also ear abnormality, then it could be a partial representation or partial manifestation of Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome. And then these patients are also prone to other malignancies which include pancreatoblastoma, hepatoblastoma, rhabdomyosarcoma, and even adrenal cortical tumors. So these are the three syndromes you must remember for your entrance exam if you are an aspirant. So this is a description. You may get a panel like this in a visual case. Large protruding tongue due to macroglossia, one limb bigger, one limb smaller, and furrows present in the same child. If the question says same child is having all three, think of Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome. Useful point, not particularly mentioned, but mentioned in the neonatology textbooks. Patients with Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome also have hyperinsulinism, and so they are at risk for persistent neonatal hypoglycemia. So hypoglycemia is one of the neonatal manifestation of Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome. Now, conundrum. How will you distinguish Wilms tumor versus neuroblastoma? There are many ways of distinguishing them, but the classic things which you are supposed to remember are as follows. Wilms tumor presents in the age group of peak age is 2 to 5 years, whereas neuroblastoma, the age is 0 to 5 years, which a tendency for more cases occurring in less than 2 years of age. So younger population is more affected, although the age mentioned in Nelson is 0 to 5 years. Wilms tumor presents with an abdominal mass which usually does not cross midline. Neuroblastoma can cross the midline. Third, Wilms tumor, it is usually non-tender. Neuroblastoma can be tender in some cases. Wilms tumor, no bony metastasis is seen. The exception being the rare variant clear cell sarcoma. In neuroblastoma, the bony metastases are common. Wilms tumor shows calcification in only 10 to 20% cases, whereas neuroblastoma shows calcification in 90% cases. If Wilms tumor shows calcification, it is usually of the stippled type, although this description of stippled versus non-stippled is no longer followed. So calcification is more common in neuroblastoma than Wilms tumor. Wilms tumor causes distortion of the pelvic calyceal system, whereas neuroblastoma does not do so. It will not cause distortion of the pelvic calyceal system. Wilms tumor has a tendency to form thrombus. It can extend into the inferior vena cava, whereas neuroblastoma instead extends into intraspinal region, which Wilms tumor does not do so. So neuroblastoma extends into intraspinal areas, whereas Wilms tumor has a tendency to grow into the inferior vena cava and sometimes can even reach up to the right atrium. So these are some of the points based upon which Wilms tumor can be distinguished from neuroblastoma. The further discussion of genetics to Dr. Vandana Puri. Over to ma'am.
So 90% of the Wilms tumors are sporadic. Only 10% of Wilms tumor are familial or associated with germline mutations. Okay, so the syndromic manifestations, which has already been told by Dr. Sandeep, belongs to these 10% cases, that is germline mutation, WT1 and WT2. Okay, why are they named differently? Because they are present at different locations. Both are present on 11p, okay, that is short arm of chromosome 11, but the locations vary, okay, so the locus vary, okay. So WT1 is present on 11p13, WT2 is present on 11p15.5. Now, WT1 is a very, very important gene because it helps in the normal development of two organs of our body, that is gonads and kidney. Now, what happens is, now if you look at the location, so let's say I'm drawing a chromosome here, and on this chromosome I am taking a location of 11p, okay, 11p13. At 11p13 here we have WT1. Okay, at the same place we also have, just adjacent to this location, we have another gene called PAX6. What do you mean by dominant negative? So it means dominant. It's an autosomal dominant gene and it is negative. It is negative. It shows a negative impact. That means what happens is that now, we get two copies, okay, of alleles. One copy from the mother, one copy from the father. So we get two alleles, one paternal allele, one maternal allele. Now what happens is, suppose, so this is a transcription factor. So this transcription factor has a DNA binding domain, okay. So this is a zinc factor, okay, zinc finger transcription factor, okay. So it has a DNA binding domain, okay. So now what happens is, in this, the zinc finger transcription factor, the domain which binds to the DNA, okay, so DNA binding domain of the zinc finger transcription factor, that is WT1, gets affected, gets mutated. So whenever it gets mutated, this WT1 allele gets abnormal. This WT1 allele gets abnormal. So if you look at this allele, it has become abnormal. So when this allele becomes abnormal, it will not let the normal allele to function well, okay. So it will not let normal allele also to function well. That's the mutation which they have recently described in this syndrome called as Dennis-Drash syndrome. So that's a recent update, okay, and you should all know this, okay. So this is called Dennis-Drash syndrome. So imprinting is a normal phenomena. So here the maternal alleles are imprinted, paternal alleles are expressing, so normal. Now if there is loss of this silencing, what happens? Okay, so loss of imprinting means now there is loss of silencing. So the maternal alleles also start expressing themselves. Paternal is already expressing. Mother also starts expressing. So what will happen? Because both of the alleles start expressing itself, there will be overgrowth of the tissue. Here, first sporadic mutation that they have described is gain of beta-catenin. Okay. So one mutation that is told here is beta-catenin. Probably there is beta-catenin gain which can be seen in sporadic Wilms tumor. Or the second mutation, which is most important and most recently added, is, what is the recent thing that is coming up nowadays? MicroRNAs. There is a special type of microRNA, that is microRNA 200, okay, which is very, very important for the normal functioning of WT gene, okay. So WT gene basically helps in, it's a very important gene which help in changing mesenchymal cells to epithelial cells. So this is a very important change which occurs in our embryonic life. This is called as mesenchymal epithelial transition. So in an embryonic life, mesenchymal cells change to the epithelial cells with the help of microRNA 200. So this is a microRNA 200 which is very important for changing mesenchymal cells into epithelial cells, which alter or affect the function of microRNA 200, okay. Then this transition will not change, this occur. That is, mesenchyme to epithelial transition will not occur. So there's some genes which affect this microRNA 200 effect. So these genes are microRNA processing genes, okay. So you remember that dicer mutations. So if I had seen nephrogenic rests in Wilms tumor, that means this person is going to develop contralateral Wilms. Look for anaplasia because anaplasia is a marker of poor prognosis in Wilms, and look for the nephrogenic rest because if you see nephrogenic rest in one kidney, that means this person is going to develop contralateral Wilms. Loss of heterozygosity of 1p and 16q.
If I see aniridia in a neonate or an infant, all right, especially a neonate, what am I going to do? So that's all that I'm going to talk to you about. Definitely, it's going to be of concern to the parents. They will definitely be able to see something like this, which is like abnormal. And when I see it in a neonate, what am I going to do? I'm going to think in terms of this baby developing a Wilms tumor, okay? All right. Now, aniridia, even if it is sporadic, meaning there is no history in the family, okay, and even when it is sporadic, there is a 5% chance that these babies can develop Wilms tumor, all right, and that could be a part of your Weger syndrome. Now, all of you know what is Weger syndrome? Wilms tumor, aniridia, genitourinary abnormalities and mental retardation or mental subnormality, okay. So, now I want to keep this baby in follow-up for a subsequent Wilms tumor, not with me, but with a pediatrician, okay. So, I am going to tell the parents of this baby that they have to be under surveillance as the child grows because there is a chance of developing Wilms tumor. But now the parents are going to ask me, ma'am, how or what is the chance of my baby developing a Wilms tumor? So, for that we have genetic screening. Now, aniridia per se, as you know, is because of PAX6 gene mutation, and you know Wilms tumor is because of WT1 gene deletions, all right. Now, both of them are located in chromosome 11p band 1 subband 3, and both of them are just separated by 700 kilobases. So, they are so close to each other, all right. So, they are present on the short arm of chromosome 11 band 1 subband 3. So, I am going to run a gene analysis. So, we can do a fish screening, we can use a fish technique to look for these mutations, or better we can look for deletion analysis. Now, deletion analysis you can do by gene array techniques or by PCR techniques. So, I am definitely going to run through this. So, this is one of the latest things as an ophthalmologist I should know, so that when I see a baby with aniridia, I think of a subsequent risk of Wilms tumor as part of Weger syndrome. This is all that I wanted to tell you as an ophthalmologist.
So, thank you very much. We have summarized Wilms tumor. All the eminent faculties have discussed Wilms tumor in the best possible way. You have the entire spectrum of what you need from a clinical integrated manner in this video. Add this to your notes and practice the points which have been mentioned to you when you attend your clinics. I hope everyone will benefit from the discussion. This is me, Sandeep Sharma, signing off with all the other faculties. Thank you very much and keep working hard.